So you need a therapist. Well, if you are watching this video, you probably want a therapist, and that's why you're here. Or you are considering a life coach and you're wanting to know, how do I choose? How do I choose between the two? And how do I choose the right one for me? And that's what we're going to talk about today. So stick around. If you see me look off to the side, my notes are over here. Hey, hi, hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm Candace. I am a mental wellness coach, formerly a therapist, hopefully a therapist again soon here in Washington. It's a whole big thing with my transferring my license, but I'm a mental wellness coach. This channel does not substitute for therapy, but we're going to talk about how do you choose therapist or life coach, mental wellness coach, and what do you look for when you're choosing that person. So you're going to hear me give some disclaimers as we go through this, but I really want to talk about, like, how do we choose between someone? Now, I've talked a little bit before about the differences between life coaching and therapy. So I'll give a little bit of a brief discussion, but today we're going to focus on how do we choose. So when we look about mental health coaching, therapeutic coaching, or life coaching, we are looking at things that are like future driven. We are looking at things like goal setting and developing your dream life and how you can achieve that. For me personally, I work with things like burnout recovery, role fatigue, so imposter syndrome, burnout recovery. I deal with identity stuff like confidence and self-esteem, and I deal with communication, things like assertiveness, setting boundaries, things like that. All things that a therapist could do as well, and I have done as a therapist, but they're not clinical issues. So your therapist is looking at DSM diagnoses. Your therapist is looking at treatment of chronic illnesses. Your therapist is looking at helping you look at the past, dig in there, process emotions, heal your trauma, and then build your life going forward. And they might work in conjunction with a coach, but your coach is not going to diagnose you. They're not going to treat chronic clinical mental health issues. And if they try, they're not doing it ethically, which we're going to talk about later. So that's kind of the difference. The life coach is really there to see you kind of move forward, develop skills that are going to really aid you moving forward. They're going to help you through something very specific that's going to have like skills and tasks and things that you can actively like work on and grow through. Whereas your therapist is going to have a lot of like the root of the problem, diagnosing, processing trauma, reflecting your emotions, things like that. In both of these things, though, the therapeutic relationship is really important, so we are going to talk about that. So now let's look at how do we choose. Now, on the surface, what we're going to talk about is going to look completely obvious. You're going to be like, duh, yeah, of course, those are the things I would do. But when we get down to it, having a good therapeutic relationship increases the successful outcomes of either our coaching or our therapy journey. It's just fact. So choosing the right person to seek services from actually is a key to the whole process. So, disclaimer, caveat, whatever you want to call it. I will talk about this below as well, but I can't emphasize it enough. Coaches can do a whole lot, but they are not mental health therapists. Even in my current role, I have the education. I was fully licensed in Oklahoma. We moved, so I am not actively going to act under a license as a therapist. They don't provide therapy. I don't provide therapy currently. If you are dealing with crisis, trauma, you need to process past hurts, mental illness, you need a therapist. That's who you're looking for. So when I go through this list, you're applying all these things to a therapist. They can diagnose and treat clinical issues. No coach should be doing that. I repeat, no coach should be doing that. You're going to get an earful about this when we get to one of our later topics, but I want to emphasize that. Coaches can do a lot for your mental and emotional well-being, but they're not providing therapy. So when you're thinking about who to seek out, start there. What am I looking for? Which is what we're going to get into. So how do we choose a therapist or coach for us? Step one, or number one. There's not really steps. You can do this kind of out of order if you want to, but the first one, assess your goals. Again, going back to what we were just talking about, if you know you are struggling with depression, anxiety, if you've recently, or not recently, previously been diagnosed with things like bipolar, schizophrenia, a personality disorder, and that is what is kicking up for you, that is what you need help treating and getting back on track or whatever, you want a therapist. So what is actually driving you to seek services? Is it, my life feels kind of stuck right now, I am burnt out, I'm overwhelmed, I'm tired, I'm dealing with a crazy amount of imposter syndrome, or I'm functioning, but I'm anxious a lot. Maybe it's, I just want to get better in my relationships, how I relate to people, things like that. You could seek a coach out for those things. If you know what's going on, though, is a diagnosable, treatable mental illness, and that's what you are focused on, that's who you need to seek services from. Again, absolutely no coach should be out here doing therapy. It just should not be happening. If you're like, I want to get control of my life in the moment, I'm looking at setting goals, and I want to design this dream life that I just love it so much. I have this lifestyle. I want to learn how to break the barriers, what's stopping me. I want to learn how to set better boundaries. I want to learn how to communicate assertively. Those things can all be handled by a coach. They can all be handled by a therapist too. But you're also, later we're going to talk about the cost differentials, things like that. So you're going to want to look at those things. Are you wanting it to be skills based? Are you wanting to talk to a person? Coaches really do shine at like the present day and the future stuff. Like I said, I focus on burnout recovery and role fatigue, things like imposter syndrome, burnout, things like that. I focus with my clients on things that are easily actionable, but we are not going into their trauma. We're not going into, I'm not diagnosing and treating anxiety. I might be dealing with someone who has anxiety. We might talk about momentary things they can do, but to actually treat the anxiety, I would refer them to a therapist. So I do things like radical self-acceptance, self-confidence, assertiveness, setting boundaries, things like that. And a therapist could help you do those too. I absolutely did those things with my clients when I was working as a therapist. But now the difference is I don't diagnose and treat mental health issues. I don't do therapy with my clients. I'm not treating anything, things like that. Second, what is the therapist or coach's area of study or of specialty, not of study? This is important because if you know you want help with depression or anxiety or another mental illness that you've previously been diagnosed with, CPTSD, things like that, you want a therapist who really knows those things. You want a therapist. I would probably not be the right therapist for most men, honestly, but a man dealing with like some sort of explosive mood disorder or I didn't work a lot with personality disorders. So honestly, I would probably have referred someone out, not because I don't want to work with them or I don't like them, but because it's not my area of specialty. I'm great with teens and teen issues. That's what I work with a lot. I'm great with women with anxiety, depression, mom issues. That's what I've been working on. Teens and moms, even before I was a mom. But that's what my whole career has been built on. So it's easy for me to do those things. I have that specialty: anxiety, depression, mood disorders like bipolar, anxiety disorders, OCD disorders. Again, I don't work with them actively at this moment, but I can help them find their therapist, right? So you want to find an area of specialty that matches. Look for a coach who matches what skill set you are wanting to gain. If you are a mom who is burned out right now and you're like at the end of your rope, that is my jam. But if you are a single man in his 40s who is looking to make a career change, that might not be for me. But there are many coaches out there who could do that, who could be like, let's look at your emotional intelligence and your, skill set and how we can pivot and how you can show up in your interviews. That's not going to be me. I am the one who's going to sit with you and like really work on, as a woman, as a mom, as a creative, as someone running their own business, how do you get over burnout? How do you still run the business you want to run and build the life you want to build with me as your coach? So find the one whose area of specialty matches what you're looking for. Also look for a therapist or coach whose mode kind of matches what you're looking for. So things like in person, in groups, how do they charge you? You want to look for their area of specialty and their modes for how they work. So that brings us into number 3, which is the cost and availability. So we want to consider, what are you able and willing to spend? What is your line? Because what services you seek might vary based on what you can or are willing to spend, and whether or not that coach or therapist is available to do that. So for example, for most of my coachings, I have done payment plans with my coaches that I've worked with in the past, business or life coaches. I will do payment plans. I have had therapists in the past where I'm like, hey, you are the right therapist for me after asking all my questions, which we're going to talk about in a minute. You're the right person. We fit. This is what is going to be therapeutic and helpful for me on the therapy side. So I can't come every week. Can you do every other week? Because I can't afford $100 every other week, $150 every other week, whatever it is. So if you're out there like that, some therapists will work with you. Some therapists have a sliding scale. You can find that out too. Some coaches have a sliding scale. So we can kind of like look for those things. And then you want to consider their availability. Does their availability match your financial needs and your availability? Does it match how it fits in your life? Do they do in person? Do they only do online? Can they do evenings? Can they do weekends? Whatever fits with your schedule. And I am of the personal opinion that every therapist and coach should be able to set their schedule, and they don't have to bend outside of that. Again, I work with clients on burnout and boundaries, and that is a big thing for therapists and coaches when they take on too much. So if the person doesn't have leeway, they might not be the person for you. And I know as a client, that's hard to hear, but as a therapist, it's kind of important to really consider, like keeping your boundaries. So as a client, it's important for us to respect those boundaries. So let's see. Yeah, so that might narrow down who you can work with, because cost and availability might really be a factor. And that's not to say that coaching will be less than therapy. Actually, sometimes it can be more than therapy. But either which way, you kind of have to look at the cost, what you're willing to spend, and what you are working on. That thing that you're going to seek services for. So number 4, sorry. The therapeutic relationship is important. So comfort and relationship matters. Are you comfortable with this person? Are you comfortable with who they are, how they present themselves in the session, be it a virtual session or an in-person session? Having a coach or a therapist that you are comfortable with is so important, because like I said, that therapeutic relationship is so key to the success of your journey, either in therapy or in coaching. And yes, a coaching relationship can be therapeutic because it is helpful. It is doing what it's meant to do, which is to push you towards your goal of internal centering, healing, calming, building that life or business you want, healing from the past if you're in therapy, things like that. Through this relationship, a lot of healing occurs, even when we're not really looking for it. So, finding someone with genuine regard towards you, that you have a genuine regard for, is so important. Because when we have that, we are more willing to open up, in this relationship. And once we can do that, we actually are going to get more help than we realized, because we've shared enough that they can do what they are trained to do. As a therapist and as a coach, when someone came into my office and they weren't comfortable and they weren't sharing, I could not do my job properly. And sometimes we don't click with everyone, and that's okay. That's something that I think more therapists and probably more coaches should be willing to admit. We are not everybody's cup of tea. The same goes for the person who is offering the services. It's okay to fire a client, and it's okay for a client to fire you. So look for that comfort and relationship. Number 5, ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. This can happen at any point in the process, but especially early on when you're doing your intake, your initial phone call, whatever it is. Get to know their practice, their programs, how they operate, how they work. For example, my current therapist, the one that I see in this season of life, my first meeting with her, I was a mess because it was PMDD week. And I specifically asked her, do you know how to handle PMDD? Like, do you have experience with it? And I wasn't asking her personally, like, hey, do you have this disorder like me? Because that's invasive. But I was asking, do you have the skill set to work with a client like me? And you need to be able to do that with your coach or your therapist, and they should both be able to answer you honestly. If they can't, don't work with them. Just don't do it. Trust me. So when I need support for something in that season of life, that's what I make sure that the person can do. If I need help running my business, I'm going to go to a business coach who actually knows how to run a business. I'm going to see what their process is and see that they're doing what they're doing, right? I'm going to see what their clients are doing. So like, I have worked with clients who have really been able to up-level their businesses and their family lives because they're having less burnout, they are more confident in themselves, they are having less of that imposter syndrome. They're showing up in boldness instead of anxiety, and it's great. So ask those questions. If a therapist advertised that they work with anxiety, ask about your kind of anxiety. If I want help with my social anxiety and someone advertises they work with anxiety, I'm going to go ask them, what about someone with social anxiety? Is it just like, what level of anxiety do you work with? Like, I work with all levels of anxiety. And I am super comfortable with social anxiety because, again, I work with teens and that happens a lot. So ask anything, especially early on, that will let you know if this person is the right fit for you. If you don't ask, you won't know, and they won't know what you're looking for. Another thing, this is kind of a side note, about confidentiality. If your coach doesn't address confidentiality in your intake or your consult phone call or when you're doing paperwork, if your coach doesn't have paperwork like a contract, probably don't work with them. But if they don't address confidentiality in there, you need to specifically ask them about it, because in any kind of relationship like this, confidentiality is essential. By the way, if they want to use your testimonials in their business, they have to have permission. That should be in their contract too. That should be part of their confidentiality. So ask them about it. Maybe they forgot, maybe things got rushed in your meeting, whatever. If a therapist does not mention confidentiality and they don't have paperwork about confidentiality, that's a huge red flag. Don't go to them, because therapists have laws regulating them that coaches don't, and coaches should still be following ethical best practices. Absolutely. We're going to talk about that in a second. But if a therapist doesn't mention confidentiality, don't report them. Okay. That's not usually an issue though, because it is a legal issue. But if it comes up, just heads up. The last thing, number 6, is a caveat for coaches. Now, if you realize you need therapy, please seek out a therapist and not a coach. If you are looking into a coach though, and you have heard all this and you're like, a coach is what I need. Because again, a coach will be super focused on that part of your journey. But if a coach's materials, if their website, if what they're doing does not emphasize that they are not doing therapy, if they are not telling you, hey, I'm not a therapist, this is not therapy, this is coaching, we're working on this specific thing, I would not proceed, because a coach who is acting ethically will let you know that their service is coaching and not therapy. And you might be like, yeah, duh, hello, Candace, of course it is, it's coaching. But they need to emphasize so that every client that works with them knows that they have informed consent, that they know the service they're getting. If they think they're getting some kind of therapeutic coaching or therapeutic service or therapy or counseling, it needs to be more transparent. So I call myself a mental health or mental wellness coach. And that's because the things that I'm dealing with are going to actively have an impact on your mental health as a mom in this era of your life. But I am not doing therapy, and my website disclaimer says it. Everything I put out there says it. Like, I am coaching. I am coaching on these specific things. I am not going into trauma. If I have a client that's like presenting with these things, I'm going to find them a therapist. I'm going to help them I'm going to do my best to help them find a therapist licensed in their state, in their area, because that is the ethical thing to do. If a coach already at the outset is not being ethical, please don't work with them. So that's my caveat. If you notice that a therapist is not being ethical, also don't work with them and report them. Okay. There are procedures, there are ways you can do this. So please report therapists who are not being ethical, that are not working within their purview. And please be wary of coaches who can't even start off out the gate being ethical with like, hey, my services are not therapy. And I think there's a lot of coaches that don't actively mention this. And I still think it's important to really consider, because there are a lot of coaches saying they're trauma coaches or whatever. And that's not safe, because a lot of them are not trained. And even I have specialized trauma CBT training. I am not doing trauma CBT with my clients. I do some techniques that are CBT like inspired. Like I use some of the ideologies, and we work on exercises that will help with thoughts. But I am not doing CBT. I'm not doing trauma-based CBT. I'm not doing trauma work in this season. So if a coach can't be ethical out the gate, please do not hire them as your life coach or your wellness coach or what have you. It's a little easier with some other kinds of coaches because we don't expect them to do therapy, but with life coaching, we often do think that it's like therapy adjacent, and so we have to be really careful about that. So if you are on a journey to healing from the past, moving forward, this can be a guide to really help you find the right kind of professional to like seek out. A lot of people, once they've had their therapy journey and they're like, okay, I graduated from therapy, but I still want support, or I want these specific set of skills or what have you, that's where a coach can really come into play. So use this as a guide to find the right helping professional to work with. And if you are hearing this and you're thinking, I want to work with a coach whose mission is to help moms kick burnout and imposter syndrome and calm the anxious chaos and build confidence so I can live a dreamy, fulfilled life, I might be the coach for you. Stick around, like and subscribe, join this channel, see what we've got going on. And in the doodly-doo below, I will put a link to our Friday coaching roundup where you can get our Friday coaching emails where we have videos and social media posts and just coaching tips that go out each Friday. That'll be down below. And you can sign up. You can get that. If you want to know more about my programs, I do have a few spots. I have quite a few spots still open. And I do have a membership also that is, if you're not looking for one-on-one, but you just want extra support, I have a membership. I do primarily work with moms, but I will work with women. I'll work with female creatives. I work with moms running their creative businesses, things like that. So you can find all of that down below. And if you have any questions, if you want to know more about choosing a coach or choosing a therapist or choosing between the two, if you have any other questions, I'll also link all my blog resources below where I talk about this stuff in detail as well, like what the differences are and things like that. But if you have more questions, put them in the comments. I would love to talk to you about that. And if anyone wants to know like how I got here, that journey will be in those blog posts. But if you want a video about it, let me know. Yeah, but I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you guys next Tuesday. Bye, everybody.